Buongiorno. It is early. It's very early. Yo parlo un po' italiano, but that's about it. So this is going to be in English today. O lo podemos hacer en español, si quieren. Español si hablo. Italiano un po'. So my name is Bermon. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is my second year at Codemotion. It's a fantastic conference. They do a great job. I love coming to Rome. The people are very nice. They remind me of the people in South America because they're friendly and kind and very excited and animated when they speak. So I love coming here. The folks with the orange tags, they're doing a fantastic job as well. If you get a chance, tell them thank you. This is a lot of work to put together for so many days with so many people doing so many things, and they're doing a great job. Now, I have a wife and a daughter who can't be here, and they're kind of sad. My daughter's been doing an extensive coding course in Ruby, so she's been doing that for the last couple months, so she couldn't make it. So I have a quick favor for everybody. If you could stand up real quick. Just real quick. Yeah, don't be afraid. And I want you to act like you're giving me a hug. Just do that. Yeah, that works too. I'm only going to do a quick picture. All right. 1, 2, 3. Very good. They send you back a hug. So, my name is Bermon. You can find me on Twitter at Bermon Painter. And kind of in the past, I've had the pleasure to work on projects like SAS. So I had the pleasure to design the logo, work on the branding for saslang.com with Gina Bolton and Michael Parento. It was a really fun project to kind of contribute to open source as a designer. So there we go, SAS logo. You can order those online. I'm not sure how they handle shipping outside of the US, but they exist. And then within Charlotte, I'm heavily involved in the community where I organize a meetup group for front-end developers, user experience designers, and I also put on a conference in Charlotte called Blend Conference. Not quite as big as Codemotion, but it's still pretty fun. So we do 4 tracks with designers, developers, user experience, front-end, and we don't allow devices, so we don't allow laptops, we don't even have Wi-Fi. The whole point is to talk to people. So that's coming up in September. If anybody wants to visit us in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then I work for Cardinal Solutions. So Cardinal Solutions is a consultancy based in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I manage their user experience practice in the southeast part of the United States, where we consult with Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, creating applications for mobile and desktop. So what I'm going to share with you today are some experiences that I've had building software for some fairly large companies, and some things that don't work well, and then some things that we've kind of found our way to improve how we integrate user experience as a discipline into development methodologies. So out of curiosity, who is a designer in the room? One? You get extra points. So we have one designer. Who is a developer? Yeah, okay, so I'm talking to you, and you too. We can totally talk after and compare notes. Yeah, so you do both. Good. Distance high five. So this is kind of the challenge that we have, is we're building software, and we typically use Agile as our preferred methodology. We kind of gravitate towards Scrum. And as a designer, it doesn't fit in very well with Agile or Scrum because it's a development methodology. So some of the activities that we do from a user experience standpoint don't jive too well with Agile. So we're going to talk about how to make all of that work. Now, before we get started, I want to just clarify what is user experience. It's become kind of a fuzzy term. People, you have UX developers and UX designers and UX whatever. Everything is UX, at least in the United States. Now, in most cases, people associate user experience with the aesthetic, how something looks. And it's not quite right. So the first definition is user experience is a professional practice. So for example, I'm the practice manager for user experience, and I manage the capability. This includes capabilities like information architecture, user research, content strategy. On the more tactile side, we kind of lump in graphic design or visual design, interaction design, and usability. So this is the practice of user experience, what we do from our day-to-day. The second definition is the outcome of using a service. So when you go to Codemotion.com or you go to any type of service online or on a mobile device, the outcome of using that service or that product is also a user experience, good or bad or mediocre, or whatever that may be. Now, I tend to classify the outcome as user experience as a combination of the following. So something that is accessible, credible, useful, desirable, findable, valuable, and useful. So let's talk about Scrum for a bit. Who uses Scrum? Okay, a few folks do, a few folks don't. It's about half and half. So this is kind of my design view of Scrum and how it works. So the smallest unit of work expressed to benefit the end user, this is the user story. So you break things up into user stories. So this causes us to constantly think about the outcome, the end experience for the user. Now the challenge is that user stories are typically based off of the needs of the business. They're not actually based off of any user research. The business says that they want a feature, so we kind of divide that up into user stories or a series of user stories and develop software based off of the user story. Then all those user stories are prioritized in something we call the backlog. The backlog, I think, is one of the most powerful tools that exists within Agile and Scrum because it allows us to kind of keep track of our work, manage things like scope creep, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So within, there's this concept of iterations or a sprint. So this is a single cycle of work. It could be 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on your preference and the size of a project. But the goal is, at the end of each iteration, you're delivering working software, right? You want to deliver something that somebody can use in some varying degree. So we have stand-ups. Stand-ups are daily short meetings where the entire team gets together to talk about what they've accomplished, what they plan to accomplish that day, and then anything that's preventing them from doing good work. So getting feedback from a stakeholder, waiting on a developer or a designer to provide some type of asset. And the whole purpose of a stand-up is it's not necessarily a reporting tool. The reason it exists is for accountability within the team and for transparency. Now, at the end of all of that, there's something called a retrospective. So this is a meeting that you hold at the end of each sprint. And the team as a whole, they take an honest look about what went well for the past 1 week or 2 weeks in the iteration. And then they discuss how they can improve the next sprint. So you have kind of two levels of improvement going on. You're iterating over what you're doing as a developer or as a designer, but you're also iterating over how efficient and effective you are at estimating tasks and accomplishing work during a sprint. On the converse side of that, we have something that you call iteration or sprint planning. So this is the meeting at the beginning of a sprint where the team plans what they're going to be doing for the next week or 2 weeks in that iteration. These meetings typically include some type of estimation and fleshing out user stories a bit more. So there we go. So that's a quick rundown of Scrum and what it is and the various activities that exist. There are a few more, but at a high level, that's Scrum. So as a designer and as a user experience designer, I'm also a developer. So I do a lot of front-end code, a lot of JavaScript, a good bit of Ruby. So I can do kind of end-to-end. But specifically at Cardinal, I focus on the more client-facing or consumer-facing work. Anything that touches the UI is something that my group would do. So we tend to stop at JavaScript. Any of the back-end lives in our app dev practice, but we try and work together. So as we've done this, I've been at Cardinal for 2 years, and these are some of the challenges that I've noticed working with a fairly large consultancy with lots of developers that do a really good job, is that within user experience, it's very hard to time box those activities. It's very hard to determine that, all right, the business has this requirement. How do we know if that's the right requirement? How do we know that we should do that? How do we know that we should do that requirement now? And then how are we going to make sure that that requirement is done and it's successful? it's hard to time box that because you end up integrating or interacting with end users and customers, and you may find a lot of really good feedback that either obsoletes that business requirement or has various things that could improve something. So in a typical consulting environment, a business analyst is the one that's gathering the business requirements. Those are passed off to a developer, maybe some designers, and the designer will design some Photoshop comps and then hand those over to the developer, all sliced up and happy, and the developer implements those changes. And then they just kind of repeat that over and over and over again. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to utilize stronger collaboration so that we can balance the business needs and what we're building, but there's kind of a gap in most cases. One of the things that the businesses typically don't take into account are the actual needs and goals and requirements of the end consumer, the customer. So what we're trying to do is kind of fill that gap within user experience and kind of bring it all together so that we're meeting the needs of the business and the customer for both technical capabilities and creative direction, hopefully at the end producing a product that's easy to use and that's desirable. So this is like if I try to, this is how it feels, I think most of the time, trying to get the business and UX and design and development to kind of work together. It feels very forced sometimes because we're so accustomed to doing our thing and doing it well. Opening up and coming together is a bit rough. But when it works, it really works. It makes everybody feel so happy. So this is what we're trying to accomplish, I think. On the very beginning, we're trying to further define exactly what it is we're trying to build, why it should exist, why it should exist now, and how we're going to measure success. So in this definition portion, we're trying to define the strategy on what really needs to be built, not just business needs, but also customer needs. So essentially, we're trying to make sure we're building the right thing from the beginning. Now, on the other side of that, it requires a bit of effort up front to make it all work, to build a shared understanding as a team, and to have motivated and continued momentum throughout the development process. So at the end of that, we want to also make sure we're building the thing right. So the definition phase, we're building the right thing. The build phase or the development phase, we're making sure we're building the thing right? So there's some checks and balances going on. Now, Agile, like I said, it's a development methodology. It's really geared towards development, sitting down, heads down, and cranking through code quickly and efficiently. What it doesn't take into account most of the time are activities related to design and user experience. So most Agile companies, most Agile processes focus on execution. Business wants something, they want it executed, the team executes it. So they go through Agile motions without being truly Agile. So this is Agile little a, not necessarily the methodology, being able to kind of turn on a dime, make changes quickly and efficiently. It kind of exists in Agile. In most cases, corporations or large enterprises have been working in a waterfall process for such a long time. When they transition to Agile, they're essentially doing like miniature waterfalls. They're doing Agile things. They're kind of going through the Agile motions where they have their daily stand-ups that typically turn into just reporting. Sometimes people don't even stand up. They sit. In one case, I was working in a large enterprise. Their stand-ups consisted of about 20 people, and the meeting lasted about 45 minutes, which is not a stand-up. Definitely not a stand-up. They write user stories. They have sprint planning. They do the meetings. But they shift software at the very end of everything that's solely based on assumptions. There's no testing. There's no validating. Are they building the right thing? So here's some of the failures that I think from a user experience standpoint that exist within Agile that we're trying to kind of fix. The best experience is very difficult to build because most companies that develop software have been using waterfall. They're used to business deciding something, information architects doing some wireframe, content strategists creating content, giving that over to the designer. The designers create mock-ups. They pass all of that to the poor developers that now have this 60-page requirement doc that they don't ever read, because who wants to sit down and read 60 pages of stuff that's always changing? So what's missing is the opportunity to plan and build and launch software that provides a solid user experience. Second failure, I think, is teams are typically given 2 to 3 weeks to complete a block of work. So that's a typical sprint cycle or iteration. From my perspective, in order to attempt to research, design, develop, and test software, it's very hard to do that in a 2-week or 3-week time box. Because of that, the best experience rarely ever gets built, because the designers are typically spending their time slicing images and supporting development and not doing research and not doing the appropriate wayfinding to determine, are they building the right thing? Third would be that sometimes iterations typically never end. They seem to go on forever and ever and ever. In many cases, this happens because the backlog isn't being prioritized effectively. The business doesn't quite know what they want, so they keep adding changes and adding more changes as they kind of see the software come to fruition. This is especially bad in any project that's going to last more than 12 months. It never just lasts 12 months, ever. It always goes over time and always goes over budget. The fourth failure, because there is such a short time box to do design and UX work, we lack the time to iterate and improve. We're improving the software to a certain degree, but we're not improving the experience. This typically happens because even within Agile, there's not a very good integration between what user experience and design and development typically do. So cross-functional teams, in UX, we don't really have a lot of people that design and develop. There is a very defined handoff between what a designer would do and a developer would do. But it's much better if they do both, right? So we try and find those types of people, but in the case that doesn't exist, that collaboration needs to. And then the last is, many teams struggle with the concept of what truly is a minimum viable product. What is viable? For engineers, it's typically functional, right? Something viable is something that works. It's something, for designers, for user experience designers, something viable is something that's usable and useful, something that provides value to the business, something that's desirable to the consumer, something that's also credible, and in some cases, something that's accessible. So an MVP for a company is, what is good enough to go live? What are the promises of the brand? What is the current customer and user experience? What are you comfortable putting in front of people to make it worthwhile? So where I see many companies struggling, again, we're a consultancy, so we work with a lot of different groups. A lot of them struggle trying to understand the business benefit of incorporating user experience into their development activities, because most associate user experience with design, with the aesthetic. Now, a common thing that I see among business stakeholders is that they say one thing, like, this is what we want to solve, but they actually understand the problems very different ways. So they're not on the same page. They don't understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish. So what we typically try and do from a user experience perspective is it's very business and consumer driven, where we try and help them come to a consensus on what they are trying to build, what it's going to take to solve their problems and create a shared understanding with the group. So we do that through collaboration, and we try and work to balance the customer needs with the business objectives, the technical capabilities, and the creative direction. So we combine all of that together to create a good user experience. So the benefits of user experience, I think, from a business perspective, is we spend a lot of time trying to learn the business model, so we can effectively make better decisions. It's also a crucial part of helping define a solid business strategy. Because we're constantly trying to test and validate what we're trying to build, it helps us provide better baselines for business decisions. And then because we're constantly being involved and engaged with their customers, whether they're internal or external, this helps us understand how what we're trying to build fits into somebody's life. And then I think the most important piece is that we're constantly trying to validate what we're trying to build. We don't just build because we want to. We're taking those business rules, turning those into assumptions, and then consistently testing those assumptions as we're building the software to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, that again, it's affecting the business and both the customer. So overall, we're trying to apply user experience to increase revenue, increase shareholder value, decrease cost, expand newer existing businesses. So in summation, this is kind of what we get. So we take business requirements, we reprioritize as assumptions. It's something the business doesn't really know they need. They think they need it. We're going to make sure it's something they really need. We do some prototypes. This is where the designer-developer hybrid plays a really important role because they can take those ideas, they can prototype something out really quickly, and that gives us something that's fully functional to work with so we can measure and learn, are we doing the right thing? Are we creating something that the customer really needs? And the whole point of that is so that we can constantly and continually validate our assumptions. So, 3 integration concepts. These are the 3 ways that I see designers and developers integrating within Agile. So we'll kind of chat about it a bit. So the first one is something that we call staggered sprints. This is something that happens where a designer is typically working a sprint ahead of development. So they're doing their research, they're doing their design, they're creating the mock-ups and the assets that developers need. This actually works really well if you have a company that's been waterfall and they're trying to transition to Agile. Because it's still kind of waterfall-like, where designers are doing one thing a sprint ahead, and then by the time they finish their sprint, they have enough to go off on so the developers in their next sprint can begin to take those assets and build the software. So it allows the developers to continually do what they're accustomed to, which is build software in an iterative fashion. Now, the challenge with this is it tends to fall apart after 6 months or so. Once you're about, 6 months in, the designer can no longer keep up with the work. What typically happens is they're doing a good job 2 or 3 months in, where they're able to stay ahead and create the assets for the developer. Once you get about 6 months in, the designer then has to support the current development sprint while also working on their design sprint. So they're trying to do the design work and support the current sprint, and it tends to fall apart. Now, the second type, which, if we were really doing Agile the right way, we would have something that we call integrated sprints, where as you're creating your user stories, you're creating user stories that are both design and developer focused. So you're trying to do the design work and the development work within the same sprint. And it would look something kind of like this, where design and development are working in tandem during the same sprint to do the design and the development tasks storyboarded within a single project or a single sprint. And it kind of works, but again, it's really hard to time box some of those design activities, some of those user experience activities, because I'm trying to do user research, do usability tests, while also designing interfaces and doing prototypes, and then slicing those up for the developers. So what tends to happen here is design gets behind because you don't know if you're getting the right information. You can't go, I know that I'm going to find the right solution to this within 1 day. I don't know that. So the developers end up getting behind because they're waiting on design to finalize what they're doing and produce the assets. The third, and this is my personal favorite, and I think this works kind of the best, is where you have design sprints and development sprints. And the way this works is designer works before you even begin development. So let's talk about this. So you have a development sprint. Development is going to be time boxed. It's going to conform to typical Agile. but instead of trying to shoehorn design in that sprint or try and have the designers work a sprint ahead, the alternative is to add something we're going to call a design sprint, right? So this is something that's not time-boxed, something that happens before you do your sprint planning and before you begin your development sprint. The design sprint isn't time-boxed, and what this allows design to do is to kind of grow depending on the complexity of what they're trying to solve. So it could be a couple days, it could be a couple weeks for the designer to really sit down, do user research, do some type of analysis, work with the business, work with the customers. So by the time we begin our development sprint, we know that we're building the right thing, and we can use that data to begin creating the correct user stories and filling up the backlog. Now, during the design sprint, it doesn't mean that the developer's sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They can work on bugs. Ideally, they're working with the designer to build out prototypes, so they're building a shared knowledge on what's being built. But again, the design sprint can ebb and flow in size. For example, say we have 2 days for design sprint because it's not a very complex problem. Design and developers work together to build out prototypes and to test that quickly. They use that information to front-load items into the backlog, creating their user stories. They do their kickoff meeting. They begin their developer sprint. Developers are developing, and that allows designers time to support development as opposed to trying to get ahead. Once that finishes, you do your retrospective, see what went well, what didn't go well. The designers begin another flexible design sprint where they're taking another chunk of problems, validating those, working with the developers. Developers are working on bugs and improving their software. At the end of the design sprint, again, you go back into a sprint planning meeting. You're loading things into the backlog, and you kick off a typical dev cycle. So the dev cycles are time-boxed, 2, 3 weeks, whatever that needs to be. Design sprints aren't time-boxed in order to allow the designers to do enough wayfinding to make sure you're solving the correct problems before you develop something. I think in the end, the goal is not to develop the wrong thing. It is very expensive at the end of 6 months or a year if you don't have that constant feedback loop. If you've committed a bunch of time to develop software and you've developed the wrong features or the wrong software, that's bad for everybody. Now, another visualization that I really like is from Mario Keisaka, and he talks about the need to determine a clear direction before you begin development. So making sure you understand a clear need, you're doing your research, and then you're beginning to conceptualize what you're trying to build. So you're prioritizing your insight, you're brainstorming concepts as a team. This includes design and development. You hypothesize, again, you're taking your business requirements or assumptions, you're formulating your hypothesis and you're experimenting and you're revising. So by the time it comes to build the software, you know that you're pretty close to building the correct thing. So then you build, right? You build and you gather feedback. Okay, so in my mind, I think that is the most effective way to utilize the bits and pieces of Agile, the development methodology, but add on a separate addition for designers. So they can do their work, they can do it well. So by the time you begin developing software, you're building the right thing. Now, here are kind of the 6 must-haves that need to exist when you're integrating user experience and Agile. You always have to have room for ideation, right? You don't want to just have a business user define, we want to build this. Build these 10 features and not question why. Not question why are we building this or why are we building this now, and then how we're measuring success. You always have to do that so that you can validate your assumptions throughout the entire development process. The second one would be iteration planning meeting. So a typical definition of done within an Agile methodology is you're delivering working software. And that's fine, right? That's not horrible. But I don't think just delivering working software is the correct definition of done. Done, I think, is delivering software. You know, it needs to be functional, but I think it also needs to be accessible and credible and useful, desirable, findable, valuable, and useful. By integrating design and user experience, our definition of done is more encompassing. That there's much more information that we can gather to make sure that we're not only delivering the working software, we're delivering working software that fills a real need and affects, hopefully, a solid user experience. The second one is usability testing. If you work on Agile, how many times have you ever studied a usability study? Yeah, one. Okay, brownie points for you. It never happens, right? The designers are way too busy supporting development, and we're doing our unit tests, right? We're doing our unit tests, but we're not testing the software with real users. So my general rule of thumb is that along with unit tests and things that we have going on to test the software, we also need to make sure that we've created the correct experience that's fulfilling a customer need. So general rule of thumb, for every week you have an iteration, you should have at least 1 day of usability studies. So we typically try and do these on a Friday. So every Friday we'll sit down for a few hours, do some usability studies, gather that data, compile the data on what we're currently building so that we continually improve. What this allows us to do is, even though we're doing developer sprints, we can continually validate our assumptions through qualitative consumer insight, and that's really important. Okay, there is no amount of process, whether you're doing waterfall or Agile or Scrum or Kanban, none of that matters if your product owner isn't a strong product owner, because the methodologies will fail, a talented team will fail, none of that can compensate for poor product management. Right, so we have to have a strong product owner, and it's the team's job, I think, to hold the product owner accountable. The reason that is because of the backlog. Right, the backlog is kind of the backbone of anything that happens within Agile and Scrum. When used properly, you never have to say no to any request. Right, the business is always going to go, hey, how about we do this, or can you do this as well? Can you add that in? When a bug request is made, or an executive comes downstairs and goes, hey, I want this new feature, a competitor's doing this, we need to do this now. You don't really have to say no. What you can say instead is, great. We can totally put in that feature, but if we do this, we're not going to be able to do this, this, or this. So if you want this, and you really want this, what do you not want to do? So this allows you to rescope the conversation without allowing a scope creep, and it allows you to have a very solid business conversation with whomever's making that request on, yep, we can do it, but something else has to give. So what do you not want to do this sprint in order to fit this in? In some cases, you're relating that to, does it fit with our goals, right? All of the things that we've defined that we want to accomplish, is this going to help us accomplish those? Is it worth the cost? This is going to require, 2 sprints or 3 sprints. It's going to cost us this amount. And we're not going to be able to do these 5 things until we get this done. So is it worth it? So again, the backlog is one of the most powerful tools that we have within Scrum and Agile because it allows us to manage a project effectively. All right, so for the retrospectives, in most cases, we kind of go through the motions, but we don't really improve ourselves as a team. That's where we kind of miss the mark. For the pieces that didn't go well, right, during your daily stand-ups, the team members that had problems delivering on time or hitting their estimates, or the stakeholders that didn't provide information in a timely manner, you would talk about that during the retrospective. Talk about, these are the things that caused us not to be as effective as we could have been during the previous sprint. What doesn't happen is nobody's ever assigned to make sure that those things that didn't happen in the next sprint. So somebody on the team needs to be responsible for fixing what prevented the team from being fully productive that week. So whomever that is, the team needs to decide during the retrospective on the 3 or 5 or 10 things that the team needs to work on. Somebody has to be accountable for holding the team accountable for improving as a team. So This is a quote that I liked from Mike Kahn from the Scrum Alliance. He says, Agile doesn't require all individuals to be generalists, but individuals are required to work together as a team. And I think that's really what we're trying to do with Agile and Scrum is it's great if we have designers that can do development. It's great that we have user experience folks that can also design or maybe do development. But the whole point, I think, is we're trying to work cohesively as a team to build software that is providing a real user experience and meeting business needs effectively. So that's all I have for the presentation, so we can do some Q. I think I still have some time. So any thoughts or comments as you're working on building software as teams? Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask them later. I want to ask you about the prototype.
Mm-hmm.
My experience shows me that the prototype at some point become the actual software. And while we're building a prototype, we experiment. We don't really design the things as they should be designed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that it's a crappy code, but very often we just apply something to see if it works. If you don't really put a lot of efforts in, like absolutely provide the best architecture. So, do you have any cases like this one, or where is actually how you actually transform the prototype to the actual thing?
Right. So your question is, a lot of times prototypes become the realized software, right? So is your question how to make the prototypes be more effective?
Well, we spend some time in refactoring,
Mm-hmm.
but in most of the cases it's just not enough. And at the end, we ship something which works, but it's from a architectural point of view
Mm-hmm.
and from design point of view, I mean the design of the code, it's not really like the best thing.
Right. Okay. So, if I understand correctly, your question is then you're creating these prototypes, and these prototypes involve code, and we need to the prototypes are thrown together, right? The code's not the best. You're just let's try this and see if it works. At the end of that makes it into production, right? And you don't really refactor. So your question is how to kind of prevent that and make sure that the code that gets into production doesn't suck, right? Okay. There are varying degrees of prototypes that we try and do. Not everything is based in code. When it comes to working with designers and developers and doing those prototypes, sometimes we'll do paper prototypes and kind of test those internally with a team. In some cases, we'll use something like InVision or POP or any of these kind of static prototyping applications that allow us to either wireframe out some solutions or do some Photoshop or Illustrator and turn those into clickable prototypes so we can test out task flows to make sure that when a user is going from point A to point B, we've hit the mark, that they're able to go through the process effectively. So we try and focus more so on those types of prototypes and a little bit less on code so that we're not wasting a lot of the developers' time working on the back end, working on database schemas, writing the front end, and turning the design. Now, in some cases, it may be the best to create a fully functional prototype. In that case, we use an internal prototyping library where we have available. It's like an internal version of Bootstrap. So we do that intentionally to make it throwaway. Generally, we would try and never use those poorly written prototypes and move those to production. If we know it works, then we would typically do that before we hit our development sprint. And once we know we found a solution that works, we use that to fill in the backlog. And then when the backlog hits, then the developers turn that into production level code. So that's kind of our way to try and limit either poorly tested or poorly written code from making it to production. I mean, it's going to happen sometimes. And I think in our case, that's where we can utilize the design sprint so the developers have time to refactor and improve the code while the designers are doing some wayfinding on what they're building for the next sprint. Any other thoughts, questions?
Is the apply also like
So his question is this type of process applicable for open source projects, right? So if you're kind of the single person doing an open source project, could something like this work? I think it could, but I think this is definitely geared more towards a team setting. If you're working either by yourself or with a small group of 2 or 3 people, I mean, you could do like Agile type stuff. I think it might be a little bit too rigid for a small group. I think it's better for a small group because you really can to be agile with a little a, meaning that you can kind of pick and choose things from the methodology you think would work for your team. But I wouldn't do a really prescribed process for an open source project with a small team. I think it would slow you down more than anything. Welcome. You have thoughts? All right, I'm around most of the day, so if you have any more questions or want to chat, we can totally chat. Thanks, everybody.